just going to have to repeat that when my mother's in the room. It was 5 years ago when I had just joined McCormick Barron, several months into my time there, when Richard showed up at my door. A gleam in his eye and that Cheshire Cat grin, and he said, "Got a little project I'd like you to help on. It's up at my alma mater. If I had known then what I know now." I want to thank Mark for his comments, and I second them wholeheartedly, and thank him not only for the voice that he gives to our efforts, but also for allowing me to make my remarks today in a more anecdotal fashion about this project. But I do not want to have his comments diminished in any way. They are important, and I hope everyone heard them. I've had a little space from this project over the last several months to try and find the right metaphor. What is the right metaphor for the East College Street project? Boulders up the hill, Sisyphus did come to mind then, but you were successful and he was not. Moses wandering 40 years in the desert was an option. Odysseus and his trials on his way back from war. But no, I had to look a little more recently in history, but I came upon what I think you'll agree is the perfect metaphor for this project. And that is the story of Fermat's last theorem. And I can talk about that here because this is Oberlin, and most of you know the story of Fermat's last theorem. And some of you are immediately thinking, well, he's just picked that because it was a very challenging mathematical problem that took 350 years to solve. That's an easy answer. It's a pretty good reason, I think, as a metaphor for this. But no, I think that the parallels go much, much deeper than that. As many of you know, Fermat was a 17th century mathematician who was playing around with some problems that were very popular in the day around Pythagoras theorems and whatnot, and proposed an alternative to those problems. And in the margin where he had been describing this, he writes a note that is now the most famous note in all of mathematics. He says, "I have discovered a beautiful solution to this problem which I can't fit in the margin of this notebook." And of course, Fermat then went to his grave without describing what that solution was. And that began a 350-year journey for mathematics to try and solve that problem. Why is that relevant to the East College Street project? Well, let's start with the note itself, because of course, Fermat's note is nothing more than Richard Barron, who at the beginning of this project, on a phone call, which I've heard recounted now many, many times, basically set the three on their path with comments like, "Of course it's got to get done, we're going to get it done. And it's that easy, just like Fermat's little note, it's that easy to solve this problem." So Richard was Fermat, the problem of Fermat's last theorem. I can add that a math problem that takes 350 years to solve takes a life of its own, and this was probably the most famous math problem. So famous that after 100 years or more of trying, in the math community, Fermat's problem became sort of the third rail. You couldn't touch it. Anybody that actually admitted that they were trying to solve Fermat's last theorem was either extraordinarily naive or totally insane. And I am sure that at different times in this project, Ben, Naomi, Josh have been called both of those things, and I think that may have been appropriate. It is no coincidence, I am convinced, that Andrew Wiles, who ultimately solved Fermat's last theorem, spent 7 years in seclusion trying to solve Fermat's last theorem, ultimately bearing the fruits of his labor. And as many of you now know, 7 years is the amount of time it took for Ben, Naomi, and Josh to bring the East College Street project to fruition. And the last metaphor that I found so interesting as I thought more about this is, as it turns out, to solve the problem, Andrew Wiles had to invent not one or two, but 3 or 4 new forms of mathematics just to create the solution to this elegant and simple problem that Fermat wrote in his margins. Well, let me tell you that in 2001 and 2002, when Ben, Naomi, and Josh set out on this course, the solutions did not exist for this problem. They didn't know that at the time, but they learned it and they figured it out. And along the way, the New Markets Tax Credit Program came to fruition. New solutions in the New Markets Tax Credit Program came to fruition. The town of Oberlin invented a tax increment finance district, and on and on and on. The solutions were invented by these three and by others around them that they took advantage of to make this solution work. And So I found that metaphor extremely apt for the three of them. Some of you may actually not know why it is that it is so hard to create a $16 million mixed-use, lead design development in an unbelievably beautiful but also quite small town like Oberlin, Ohio. And just from my end of the project, I work primarily on putting the financing together with the three of them. I put together a little list, and I had to write it down because otherwise I'd forget all the different things that these three had to put together to make this project work. There were, as you now know, foundation grants. There were loan guarantees from philanthropies, not once, but twice during the project that were critical to making the project work. There were family loan guarantees. There were earmarks in congressional bills from the Department of Defense. There was the newly minted TIF program from the town of Oberlin. There was tax credit allocations and tax credit equity. There was construction loans. There was condominium loans. There was foundation investments. There was deferred developer fee. Moms, dads, not for long, trust me. We'll get those developer fees out. McCormick Barron is famous for the complexity of the projects, or infamous for the complexity of the projects that we take on, and I can tell you, this is a project that even we can be proud of. Over the 5 years personally, I experienced a number of milestones through my work on this project and during my work on this project. While working on this project, I was able to see the birth of my first child. I was able to see the birth of my second child. I was not able to see the birth of a third child, which does not exist, and I will tell you with gratitude that the first child is not yet bar mitzvah. During my work on this project, I learned that you can drive automobiles on nothing more than the used grease from French fries. During my work on this project, I learned how long one can get along and prosper without a paycheck. During my work on this project, I discovered that you can run a very well thought of and well-suited business on nothing more than cell phones and emails, and apparently round tables at local diners. And during my work on this project, most importantly, I learned that sometimes your childhood dreams can actually be the vehicle that brings you to adulthood, and that was the best lesson of all. 40 years ago, Oberlin set Richard Barron loose on the world. And I think that the college takes great pride in what Richard and his firm have accomplished in rebuilding urban America. I've gotten the privilege of watching Richard for the last few years, and I can tell you that I find three things that make him particularly unique and special. Number one, an absolute certainty and a vision for the things that must get done. Number two, an unyielding determination to see those things through. And number three, an inexplicable unwillingness to let facts get in the way. I can tell that Oberlin is equally proud of more recent alumni, Naomi, Josh, and Ben. And I can share with you that you already know that they share those three traits with Richard, lock, stock, and barrel. I hope that you will continue to be proud of them, and I want to congratulate the college, the town, and the three of you on such an amazing